Good evening all, and welcome. Before the video begins, I want to give a huge thank you and shout out to everyone who's supporting me on Patreon. If you would like to get some or all of these rewards, feel free to check out my Patreon page. It really helps me keep creating content and means the world to me. So here's the link, feel free to have a peek. Thanks guys. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable. Grab your hatchet and let the darkness take control. Last summer, a good friend and I embarked on a backpacking trip through the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire. As fairly experienced day hikers, we felt comfortable in the whites for our inaugural overnight trip. While planning, my buddy Ellis figured we could hike back to a country campsite to make our first wilderness night a little more fun. I wasn't going to disagree. Beautiful views, historic trails, and a protected night in the dry river wilderness. I was stoked to say the least. Before any hiking trip I do, I always conduct a little internet research on the trails or shelters that I will be coming across. Throughout the mid to late 1900s, there were a series of these lean-tos up and down the dry river wilderness meant for backpackers or through hikers really looking to escape the crowd in more popular areas of forest. Though as time went on and the Forest Service had other more pressing matters, many of these shelters were dismantled, except Dry River Shelter No. 3, the last remaining shelter in this wilderness zone. On the morning of our hike, I met Ellis at the trailhead, and we set off. The sky was overcast, bringing it with a dense fog throughout the forest. The weather left us with nearly no visibility. So, there went our stunning views. At least the trail consisted of prime, technical New England rock scrambling alongside the Amunusuk River. Ellis and I made it up to the Presidential Ridge, stopping by the Lakes of the Clouds. The hut was filled with day hikers, backpackers, and through hikers all socializing together. We were even rewarded with some sun and a brief glimpse of the dry river valley on the summit of Mount Monroe before the fog rolled back in. With dwindling views and a stiff wind, Ellis and I hustled tree line down to the Dry River Shelter No. 3, our home for the night. Once we dropped off the ridge into the valley, we entered the wilderness zone where rangers patrolled sparingly. Time to really be alone in the wild. As we trekked into the wilderness, all signs of civilization disappeared, and the trail was densely overgrown. Although it had been raining all week, there were no footprints in the mud either. At least we would be having some relaxing isolation, I figured. After about an hour or so of descending, Ellis spotted the lean-to just as our legs were asking for relief. A gorgeous old timber structure with a well-used fire pit along a cold mountain river. Pristine camping. As we settled in and explored the site, I found a small boundary notebook nestled in the corner of the structure. On the cover, someone wrote, Dry River Shelter No. 3. Out of curiosity, I opened it, but found nothing more than a lone man's name scribbled onto the first page and a date. Just your standard camping log. Oddly though, the man signed the book the previous day. We saw no footprints or signs of human or even animal disturbance on the trails, or here at the shelter. Rain can wash away tracks, but not all signs of animal life. Something felt off to me. I showed it to Ellis, who found it curious, but thought nothing more of the single name. He convinced me the man was probably a hiking veteran and a professional at L&T. I bought into Ellis's thoughts on the situation, in order to ease my mind. As the sun set, we started a roaring fire alongside the riverbank. Ellis commented how quiet the location was, having not seen another soul beyond the chirps of birds since leaving the Crawford path. The silence was eerie, but we figured that city life desensitized us to the wild. The sun was setting and we grew tired with the darkness. Ellis took the lean-to and I spent the night in my tent. Sleep came quickly after hiking 8+ miles with 20 pounds on my back, but this didn't last long. A brutally sharp slapping noise woke me up. The only thing I could compare the noise to would to be someone swinging a 2x4 onto a tree or snapping a thick branch. I figured it was a bear searching for our food bag hanging in a tree some 20 to 50 yards away. Nothing out of the ordinary for New Hampshire. Sleep overtook me once again, and I remember waking up to the sun rising over the peaks. I stumbled out of my tent to see Ellis also waking up slowly. As we made our morning oats and coffee, I wandered around the site again to see if I could find the marks the bear left. Instead, I noticed something odd. The small notebook was open. I swear that I put that thing back where I found it, which involved closing it and putting it in the back corner of the shelter. I most certainly didn't leave it open on the floor. "Hey Ellis, were you checking out this camp log last night?" "Nah, passed out, man. It's not like there's anything to read anyway." "You sure?" I commented as I bent over to pick it up. The lone hiker's name was not so lonely anymore. At least 20 more names filled the pages. The lone traveler whose name was originally on the first page could now be found several pages deep into the notebook. I tossed it to Ellis, whose face instantly dropped the second his mind registered what was on the page. Great. Now I knew it wasn't just some dehydration delusion of the previous day. "Dude, we must have been seeing things last night. There's no way we could have missed all these names. How the hell could we?" Ellis said. This is when I began to tell Ellis about the slapping noise during the night. I received nothing other than instant denial. These sounds were not the result of some hooligans or backward crazies harassing us. Ellis was convinced. Rather sternly, he commented, "It's a bear, Jack. It's a bear. Now let it go." And, well, we did. Ellis led us out onto the site and on our way home not 10 minutes later. A year has passed, and I'm still not quite sure what happened during our night at the Dry River Shelter 3. The memory of seeing a single name written on the front page of the notebook is so crisp in my mind. I couldn't have mistaken it. Could I have mistaken the noises I heard and the new additions to the book? Ellis feels the same way about the whole scenario. What do you think? Or were we not welcomed by the New Hampshire wilderness? I work for a well-known university as a field biologist and have recently been contracted out to the National Forest Service. For my first assignment, I received GPS coordinates, and I either had to drive or hike to the designated spot and do what they wanted me to do. This could be setting up trail cameras and/or counters, monitoring equipment, trail surveys and the like, and then recording the data 24 hours after placement. No big deal. I thought it odd that they specifically requested I place the cameras only 3 feet off the ground, and some of the infrared cameras in the trees at specified heights. Some of these locations are on designated trails, but others are way off trail in places that humans would never go. Sometimes there isn't a hotel or lodging close enough, as these are in very remote mountains, and the Forest Service has outfitted me in some pretty dank camping gear on the occasion I may have to camp. I am an experienced hiker and camper, and have spent many nights alone out in the field due to my career choice. I am a woman of about 5'6", 130 pounds, but not really afraid of anything. Again, the Forest Service has outfitted me well, and I wear an emergency beacon that will send every law enforcement officer in the area to my location in no time. So I've been assigned to this district for a few months now, and have really enjoyed my work. This is a very remote and unspoiled area, and that's why I do what I do. I get to see things most people wouldn't, and I've had so many positive and almost spiritual moments up until a few nights ago. I was working up near one of the highest points in the state, with a complex system of trails, wilderness areas, and camping. It has also been snowing with howling winds and ice storms, and I was camping up there to complete my work, and while the conditions were rough, I was almost enjoying it. My first night in the woods was pretty peaceful. I made dinner, set up camp, and drank some whiskey, and smoked some really good bud. I snuggled down in my sleeping bag and slept like a rock. It was very cold, but I wear this turtle fur face mask thing, and don't feel the cold all that much. I woke up at dawn, and went about building my fire back up, and starting some coffee, when I noticed all this churned up snow around my campsite. Not tracks, just churned up snow like someone, or something, had kicked it all around. Weird, but whatever. I had a 15-mile hike to set some cameras and didn't really have time to wonder about it. I set off on my hike, did what I had to do, and started back to camp. I never wear earbuds or anything, because hearing is one of the most important senses in the wilderness. I want to be able to hear any animals, people, or anything before I see them. It was already past dark when I arrived back to my camp, and I was too tired to do anything except strip down to my base layer, get into my sleeping bag, and pass out. Around 2 a.m., I woke up because I could hear people talking. People? I was around 30 miles up a gravel road that was locked with Forest Service gates and about 10 miles from where my truck was parked, and I could hear voices. I completely lost it. I have a firearm, and I quietly retrieved it from my pack and got back in my sleeping bag and cocked it and waited. I was on high alert. All of my senses were going wild. Eventually the voices faded and I couldn't hear them anymore, but I never went back to sleep. At daylight, I emerged from my tent to more churned up snow and my 2 trail cameras hanging from a tree about 5 feet from my tent. Cams that I had placed 15 miles out from my campsite. I packed my stuff up as fast as I could and hauled ass back to my truck. Along the way, I saw a lot of human boot tracks all around my campsite, and when I reached my truck, I discovered it had been broken into and my computer and other equipment had been stolen. I am currently in a luxury log cabin at some resort, too scared to retrieve my other equipment and too embarrassed to tell my superiors how scared I am. The Forest Service bought me a new truck, while my other one is getting the window replaced, and I did make a report about the theft, but there's no way in hell I'm ever going back to that site. And so I finally went back to retrieve my equipment and the 2 cams that were hanging near my site. I took a friend who's a former Marine with me, and the equipment I placed was undisturbed, but the 2 cams that were hanging near my campsite were both missing their memory cards. I didn't tell my supervisors how scared I was, but I did say that someone had messed with the cameras and stolen the memory cards. I also requested to never be sent back to that site again. I will still work that area, but never anywhere near as remote. I truly hope it was just teenagers looking to steal and maybe have some fun at my expense. Every person I've met around here has been exceptionally nice, even if most do hate the National Forest Service. I don't know if this means I will be fired or sent to work at a desk, but out of all of the years I've been doing this in national forests around the country, this is the most terrified I have ever been. And I'm not scared of animals, and I have many stories to share about my encounters with them. But what I am scared of are people. This happened last year in Virginia, and is also the reason why I never backpack alone anymore. I was taking summer courses at the time, and we ended up with a 3-day weekend in June. So I thought it would be a great time to go and explore some of the Virginian wilderness. I did a Google search and found a state park with a trail that looked nice, and let my roommate and family know the trail that I was going to be going on. When I got close to the park area, I saw a little outdoor shop where people hiking the Appalachian Trail stop. I went in to grab a map of the area in case I got lost. As I was talking to the owner, he mentioned a trail that's not well known that has a pretty cool waterfall and swimming hole. This piqued my interest, so I had him show me on the map. It took me outside the state park, but he said it was a great place to go. I paid for the map and thanked the owner. I texted my roommate and parents about the new trail, and I parked my car and set off on my adventure. I should note that the waterfall was going to be a side trip from my journey. I was planning 3 days, 2 nights. I started on part of the Appalachian Trail, and it was pretty packed with people, and some of them were really fun to talk to. As expected, as I got further and further from the main trails, I saw less and less people. Around early afternoon, 3 miles from my destination, I noticed it was unnaturally silent. No birds, no bugs, not even wind, and I had a feeling of being watched. I shook it off as me overanalyzing the situation. I got to the waterfall and it wasn't too spectacular, but it was cool to look at. Plus it had a good size area to swim in. So naturally, I stripped down to my skivvies and took a dip. It was pretty refreshing. As I was getting my clothes back on, I started whistling to myself. It was Chill Bill because it was stuck in my head. And that's when I heard something whistling the same tune back. I thought it was a bird copying me, so I went back and forth with it, and it repeated everything I whistled. I thought it was pretty neat. As I was setting up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched again, and I would get goosebumps and my hairs would stand on end. As night fell, I built a small fire and lit my jet boil to make dinner. As I did this, because I became hyper-aware that again there was no sound, just deafening silence. Some part of my brain was telling me that I'm not safe to leave, and I ignored it and crawled into my tent with my flashlight and book. I went to sleep without incident. When I awoke the next morning, my site was trashed. My camp stool was nowhere to be found, my bear bag with my food was cut down, and the contents were thrown around the site. My first thought was a crafty animal chewed through the rope and got to the bag. But when I looked at the rope, it was cut with something very sharp, and none of the food was touched. I also noticed bare footprints all around my campsite, and keep in mind I'm at least 6 to 8 miles from a road. As I was looking at the mess, I heard a branch snap off in the distance. I turned to look in that direction, and I saw nothing, but I heard that whistling again. My whistle from yesterday. But it was different, more sinister, and made my hair stand on end. And that's when I listened to my instincts to get the hell out of there. It sounded like it was a little off in the distance, so I packed up my camp as quickly as I could, the whistling getting ever closer as I finished stuffing the tent into my bag. I didn't bother putting anything away properly. The whistling was incessant and sounded like it was coming from all directions. I got fed up with the whistling, stood up and yelled into the woods, "Shut up! What do you want?" It stopped. It was quiet for a moment. and then it repeated what I said in my voice. It sounded just like me, but distorted like it came from an old TV. After I heard this, I immediately threw my pack on and ran in the direction I came. I heard it moving just behind me, fast switching between the whistle and my voice. It felt like it was toying with me, not coming too close, but not being too far. Eventually it sounded like it got further and further away from me, and then it stopped all of a sudden. When it stopped, I stopped and turned around, and I wished I hadn't, because I heard the most bone-chilling screeching ever coming from right next to me. That's when I started running again. I didn't look, I only ran. Less than a half mile I ran into a couple that were also backpacking. They saw the look of terror in my face and asked me if it were me that screamed and if I was okay. I told them what happened, and they decided to not go down where I had just come from. We moved to a more populated trail as quickly as we could, and as soon as I got back into my car, I drove to one of the park ranger stations and reported what happened. Since the site was off park grounds, they told me it wasn't in their jurisdiction, but that they will send a ranger to investigate. The ranger station parking lot ran right up to the woods where I was getting into my Jeep, and I heard the Chill Bill tune coming from the woods just in front of me. I never drove so fast in my life. When I told my roommate why I was only there for one night, all he said to me in reply was, "Bro, I'm never going camping with you." This happened a little over 2 years ago. I'm a 31-year-old male, 5'11", and was pretty athletic in shape at the time. I worked out, went running, and ate right. The city I live in has about 300,000 people. There are tons of parks and forests with hiking trails all throughout the city itself, and the city is pretty much surrounded by woods and farmland past that. It was fall time during the year, and occasionally, on my days off from work, I like to load up my backpack, just grab my stuff for a kind of urban hike, and take off walking across the city, hiking through a bunch of different trails and parks along the way, stopping and grabbing coffees at cafes, beer at pubs, and doing whatever just floated my boat. Those were the days. Sometimes I would take my dog with me too, but on this particular day I had taken off and left them at home. I remember loading up my backpack as usual. Sometimes I would take my dogs with me too, but on this particular day I had taken off and left them at home. I remember loading up my backpack as usual, rolling a couple of joints up to take for the journey, and getting ready for leaving. For the entire week, it had been raining non-stop, and with it being so late in the year, somewhere around October, it made it pretty cold outside, even though there wasn't snow on the ground yet. I put on my winter jacket and hat, but still kept on my hiking athletic type shoes instead of any kind of boot, and I had already walked across most of the entire length of the city into the side where it would be the town exactly opposite from where I live. This area is not especially nice, but I've never had any problems or bad experiences myself, even living in the area for a few years beforehand. On the very edge of this place is a big nature conservatory that basically runs along the outer edge of the city. So I start hiking in this area of trails after maybe 10 to 15 minutes of hiking, and I decide to blaze up one of my smokes. I walk along listening to jazz through my headphones when I finally finish my joint. I've seen no one else out at this point, which is expected as it's a bit damp and cold, but after maybe 5 minutes from finishing up my smoke, I turn around a bend of trees and see another guy walking down the same trail as myself. It's maybe 45 seconds until we pass each other. I turned down my music and get a good look at this guy. He looked homeless, which isn't too uncommon in this area, but he had mostly grey hair with still some spots of brown, but dramatically thinning even though it ran down to his shoulders, and a patchy beard that was coloured the same. He had a green type jacket on and some dirty jeans, just looking like a dirty alcoholic and rather unpleasant in general, but who am I to judge? The guy looks annoyed, and as we're getting closer to each other, even though I'm looking directly at him, he never makes eye contact with me the whole time. He looks like he's almost mumbling or pouting or saying something under his breath, but as we finally pass each other, he still doesn't acknowledge me, so I didn't feel the need to say anything either, and just kept going my way. I don't really think too much about it, and continue walking. But before he turns around the bend of trees that I had just come from, I turn my head back towards his direction and take a look at him, only to see him doing the same to me already, as he's still walking. Our eyes connect, and I don't break eye contact even though we're about 40 yards away from each other now. I'm just kind of like, weird, as I continue to walk and turn my music back up. The more I think about him, the more I weird myself out. But then I tell myself that I'm being paranoid because I'm high, and continue to go about my business. I'm hiking along for about another 10 minutes or so, listening to jazz really loudly in my headphones, packed underneath my thick winter cap, when I'm walking along a part of the path and trail, where it's a little steeper of a decline off to my right. About a little 10-foot muddy hill type drop. I remember listening to John Coltrane, so the songs are really long, and it was just by luck that a song had just ended, and there were a brief few seconds of silence before the next song played, when all of a sudden I heard footsteps running behind me. I span around to my left as fast as possible, when the guy from before was directly on top of me. What happened next seemed like it all happened in a matter of seconds, but just fortunately, it seemed like I was in the zone when it occurred. As I spun around to my left, turning around, the man was there immediately. I basically grabbed him by the shoulder with one arm and his coat with the other, and we both go over the edge of the trail down the slope. I remember rolling down the slope completely twice on my shoulder, still backpack and everything on, and somehow landed on my knees, and was able to get into a sprinter's position and run right out on the landing. Already running at full speed by the time I even got back up, I didn't even hesitate and look back as I bolted in a straight line through everything. At first, landing and running, I was maybe 15 yards away when I heard the man yell twice to stop. The area that we had fallen down into was basically a muddy, wet marsh after all the rain. I didn't look back once. I was sprinting as fast as I could for about 10 to 15 minutes before I ran into a chain link fence separating someone's backyard from the nature preserve. I hopped in and kept running 3 to 4 blocks back into a residential area and further away from the wooded one. Finally, I stopped and caught my breath before I called up a buddy who lived nearby and had him come and collect me. After we got back to his place, I explained what happened, and he pointed out the shoulder and backpack of my jacket were completely ripped from the top, almost as if he could have had a knife and just cut my jacket as I turned around at the last second. Or it could have been when I rolled down the hill too, I don't know. Either way, I hope to never see that psycho or experience anything similar to this again. Corbett National Park in India. We had just spent 4 rainy, disappointing days in the company of mud-spattered jeeps, spotted deer, noisy wild chickens, and bland ramen. Tomorrow would be our last day. It was a full moon night. My friend and I were chilling at the edge of our camp, located just above a broad, rocky riverbed. We had to leave early the next morning, so the rest of our party had gone to bed, or were doing shots and playing cards in the tent. The couple was still hanging out by the embers of the dying campfire. My friend and I thought it best to head down to the riverbed to smoke our cigarettes. Things were peaceful, and we made our way through half a pack. I was busy reclining on a rock and contemplating the stars when I suddenly felt my friend grasp my sleeve. I raised my head. He didn't need to point. I could see it too. It wasn't far away, in fact it was close. A tiger. A fully grown tiger. Separated from us by a bed of pebbles, a few rocks, and a shallow 2-foot stream, not more than 10 meters away. Except it was completely blue, and it was standing up on its hind legs, front paws lifted in an embrace of something invisible. I still remember the gleam in its eyes, one orange, one green. It was looking right at us. It was also frozen, absolutely still as a statue. Not a roar, not a purr, nothing. Like one of those dioramas of a saber-toothed tiger you find in museums. One of our guides had warned us about a blue tiger that prowled around on full moon nights, looking for lost people to eat. We had welcomed the story as one of those fun touristy things when it was first told to us, but not to be taken seriously. But there it was, right in front of us. Fear did not take a hold of me yet. I did go light-headed within seconds though, and started to think of my family and wondering what they would be doing right now. My friend's presence was oddly reassuring, because I kept thinking fiercely over and over in my head, I'm not lost. I'm not lost. It knows I'm not lost. It can't eat me. Look, I'm not alone. I realized I was pleading with the universe. Somewhere far, far away, I heard my friend say very, very calmly, pick up the stubs. Don't leave them there. I vaguely remember obeying him. And then when I turned away from the frozen tiger, took it out of my vision, both direct and peripheral, the fear washed over me like a tidal wave. Goosebumps erupted across my shoulders and back, and I screamed. My friend and I ran like we had never run, yelling, leaping and bounding over rocks and scrambling up the embankment like cartoons. I was so sure that at any moment the tiger would pounce on me. I vividly remember my heart pounding in my ear and thinking of the raptors in the tall grass in Jurassic Park 2. We did not stop running until we had raced past the now fizzled campfire and reached the reception area, where there were still a few people up and about. Needless to say, when we went back to take a look 15 minutes later from the embankment, as there was no way in hell we were going down to the riverbed again, with flashlights and 10 other campers that we had managed to rouse, the tiger was gone. We told the others our story all next morning. It wasn't like they didn't believe us. They believed we saw something, just not a blue tiger. They thought it was the moonlight playing tricks on us, while others thought that we were high. On top of that, the guide who had warned us about the tiger was behaving very shifty and smug all morning, as if he knew what was going on. A couple of people joked that maybe he had thrown on a costume and we'd fallen for it. It wasn't like that. There was something unnatural, something unearthly about what we had seen on the riverbed. I knew it. My friend knew it. And between the two of us, we knew that we would be the only ones who knew what we had seen. That experience changed the way I viewed a lot of things. I am no longer skeptical about religion and the paranormal. I do believe there are things in this world we maybe never are going to be able to understand or comprehend. It is a peaceful place to be in, but my most immediate takeaway and my biggest piece of advice to you: don't mess around in the wilderness. Respect the rules, but you have no idea what is waiting for you there. From roughly 2000 to 2005, I lived on the south edge on Northern Virginia. This was a rural area with houses set far apart from each other, surrounded by fairly dense woods. There was a phenomenon that I came to call the woodwalkers. Due to insomnia, I had a bad tendency to stay up very late at night, sometimes all the way until dawn. Frequently, I'd leave the window partially open all night long in order to let a cool breeze in. On some occasions late at night, well after midnight, I'd hear something loudly crashing through the woods behind the house. It always sounded like a large man staggering drunkenly through the woods, always along the same path from the direction of the driveway down towards the Bull Run River. The leaves would be rustling very loudly, as if a large person were carelessly dragging their feet along the ground. Branches would be snapping, as if the person was lurching blindly through the forest. I couldn't tell if it was one person or several people, but the passing through the woods always created an alarming amount of noise. I came to expect to hear the woodwalkers every 2 weeks or so, and after a while, whenever I heard the noise of woodwalkers, I would peer out the window trying to discern who or what was making all the noise at such a late hour. I never saw a thing, no outlines of figures, and no glow from a flashlight. The really strange thing about this to me is that the apparent path they were traversing through came from nowhere and went nowhere. They just stumbled through the woods, apparently tearing their own path through the wilderness, going deeper into the woods. It's also bizarre that they would go crashing through the deep, dark woods at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. when it's pitch black without using a light source. It seems impossible to me that anyone could find their way through the woods in the dark like that. On one particular occasion, I heard the woodwalkers behind the house. Then I heard a branch of gunshots from directly behind it. It sounded like a handgun to me, and the next morning I wandered around the edge of my yard searching for expended brass, but didn't find anything. I found no trace or signs of anyone passing through the woods. In the days after the gunshots, I became increasingly determined to solve the strange mystery of the woodwalkers. I put a flashlight on a small dresser by my door. I patiently waited night after night to hear the woodwalkers come staggering through the woods. Sure enough, one night, I heard the familiar sound of something crashing eerie and slowly through the woods behind the house. I leapt up and rushed to gather the things I intended to carry outside with me, as I went to confront whatever it was that passed through the woods. I frantically pulled off my sweatpants and put on my jeans. I searched for my keychain, then unlocked the lockbox in which I kept my pistol. I loaded my ammunition into the pistol and tucked it into my belt. I grabbed my flashlight and quietly descended into the basement, then out the back door into the backyard. It took me far too long to get outside. By the time I cautiously strode out under the moonlight, I could hear the noisy movement of the woodwalkers receding into the distance. I walked slowly and stealthily out onto the edge of the woods and pulled my pistol out my belt. I crept soundlessly down the hill into the dark woods. I positioned myself defensively behind a large tree in case the woodwalkers carried firearms. I peered warily into the direction of the noise, my eyes strained to see whatever it was that was out there, but I could discern nothing through the shady branches of the forest. After a while, I pointed my flashlight towards the direction of the noise and turned it on. My night vision was instantly ruined by the reflection of light from the tangled mass of trees and branches. I turned the light off and listened to the sound of the woodwalkers fade away, and I went back inside in defeat. To this day, I wonder about the strange mystery of the woodwalkers. I'll never know who or what it was. I'm a man in my mid-30s, living in a forest area of West Virginia. I had just gotten a German Shepherd puppy from the dog pound, and needless to say, I watched her like a hawk. I didn't want anything to happen to her. Unfortunately in life, things don't often go the way we'd like them to, do they? She escaped a week after I got her. It wasn't that I'm not a good owner, but she must have gotten interested in something and ran away. I put up lost dog posters everywhere, but no one called despite the $5,000 cash reward I had offered anyone who found her. I soon got discouraged. It was hard to believe that I would never see her again. And one night, I was sitting in front of the TV absent-mindedly, just thinking about stuff, when I heard a familiar bark. I reacted out of foolish excitement and burst out my door, and I heard the bark again coming from the woods. Without thinking, I ran into the forest, shouting her name. With no response, I took the time to figure out where I was. I was deep in the woods, and I had no light except my phone, as well as no sense of direction. I began to panic, and I suddenly forgot all about my dog. And then I heard an ungodly shriek. It echoed and faded. I was so terrified I thought I would pass out. I kept walking and soon found myself on a dirt road. It seemed wide enough for a car, and I started making my way down it. And then I saw headlights again. In the darkness, I couldn't see the car. I couldn't even see 2 feet ahead of me, but I was sure I was looking at headlights. I ran towards them, waving and making a stupid amount of noise. The headlights remained still, and then they blinked. That's when I knew they weren't headlights. I stopped cold in my tracks and almost cried. The eyes lifted higher, but whatever the creature was, it was tall, at least 9 feet, and around 20 feet ahead from me. I didn't want to run. I didn't think I could in my state of fear. Instead, being the idiot I am, I turned on my phone and aimed the light at it. He was wearing a red plaid shirt and jeans. His skin was a greyish colour, and something was horribly wrong with his face. I just screamed, dropped my phone and ran like hell. I didn't care where I ran. I knew I just had to get away from that thing. I looked back. It remained there, eyes glimmering, making no attempt to chase me. I eventually found my way back to civilization and spent the night in an older couple's home and told them the story. "Oh yeah," the old man said, leaning back in his chair as I described the creature. "I've met a few folks who have seen that thing. Round here, we call him the Bubba-Jacks. He's kind of a legend around these parts. I really hope not to run into it again." I have had a few paranormal experiences in my life, but this one stands out in my mind. I am a 22-year-old male, currently in my last semester of college. This story takes place during my freshman year at the same college. I go to a smaller university in Connecticut. It's located pretty much at the base of a popular state park with a large mountain. If you're familiar with Connecticut, I'm sure you can guess which university I'm referring to. There is a lot of Native American folklore associated with the mountains, as Native American tribes used to live in the surrounding area, and some weird stuff has definitely happened there. A kid even fell to his death while hiking not too long ago, but I highly doubt that was due to anything paranormal. Behind my freshman dorm building, there was a steep hill that led into the woods. This was where everyone in our building would go to smoke weed. Halfway up the hill, there was a little cleared out space with a concrete wall that you could sit on, and then a much larger area on the top of the hill with trails and a bigger concrete wall. It was a nightly occasion for my roommates and I to go up there and to smoke, so we were completely fine for going at any time. One night, my roommate and I headed to the hill just like we did on most nights. Our other roommate stayed behind because he had to do work. We climbed the hill and went to the smaller clearing halfway up rather than the large one. There was no one else up there, and it was a little later than we normally went. But like I said, we felt safe enough to go there at any time. We smoked a few bowls and just hung out for a while. Keep in mind, both of us smoked pretty regularly, so 2 bowls wasn't going to do much for us, and I'm definitely not the type to get paranoid while stoned, so our sobriety, or lack thereof, was not an excuse for what happened. It was pretty windy that night, so all of the trees around us were loudly swaying. Out of nowhere, the wind completely stopped, and the trees fell still. Then the leaves on the trees that were standing by very slowly and eerily fell to the ground, all at the same level and speed. We looked at each other and kind of nervously laughed. Suddenly, we were both filled with this sense of impending doom, like something was telling us to leave the woods immediately. I know this because my roommate told me he felt the same way after the fact, and we grabbed our weed and fully fledged sprinted out of the woods and down the steep hill. As I was running down the hill, I fell backwards really hard and messed up my elbow. To be honest, it almost felt like I was yanked by something. But there's a definite possibility that I just slipped on the dirt because we were flying down this essentially vertical hill. I picked myself up and we ran into our dorm building, slamming the door behind us. After that, my roommate refused to go into those woods for the rest of the year. There were a few times where I went back up the hill and into those woods by myself, as I didn't feel like walking across campus to go to another spot. For the most part, it was fine. I didn't experience anything. But there were a few other times I would be up there around midnight and would suddenly be filled with the same impending doom feeling to tell me to leave. I haven't gone back to that area since, but I can still see the eerie way those leaves fell around us. In my college days about 20 years ago, me and a friend often took off for the North Georgia mountains on the weekend. When we wanted to smoke, drink, and commune with nature, these mountains were perfect. On the weekend, this unsettling event occurred to me. My friend Bill and his German shepherd Monty headed out towards Sky Valley. It was the beginning of fall semester at UGA, and not much was going on yet. We had found an area where a dirt road led back a half mile, and then we would hike in another mile or so and set up camp near a creek. Excellent trails were nearby, with fun places to explore, not to mention flat ground perfect for setting up camp. Bill and I arrived at our spot around 4 p.m. and got a fire going. We were musicians, Bill a guitar player and me a percussionist, so we sparked a joint and started jamming. Around 10, after jamming a while, we chatted about life and girls before tucking in for the night. It was a clear night, so we slept under a blanket of stars. It is important to note we never had seen any sign of another person in the area during any of our other trips. But at 2 a.m, I was awoken by Monty growling. It was a deep, guttural growl. Bill was still dead to the world, and I sat up looking around and listening, thinking maybe an animal had come near our campsite. The fire was only embers at this point. I heard barely audible voices in the distance. Focusing on the area of the voices, I saw a faint red glow, followed by another faint red glow to the left of the first. This was about 100 yards away. My mind connected what I was seeing. Cigarette embers. They were getting closer. Bill, wake up! Bill roused from his sleep, and I explained what was going on. At this point, Monty started barking as the strangers approached camp. By the time we stood up, they were in camp, completely unfazed by the now rabid 70-pound German Shepherd. Two incredibly unkempt, late 30s, early 40s, deliverance-looking guys walked up on us. Bill told Monty to calm down. I will never forget the look of these guys, skinny as hell, about 5'8", shirts caked in grime, mangy beards, and probably 5 teeth between the two men. Each had huge knives attached to their belt buckles. "What you boys doing out here? Look like you're having a good time." We responded and told them that we had been out here to camp and drink some beer. They asked if we had any weed, and we gave them a joint. They looked around a bit and asked if we wanted to smoke with them. We declined, saying we were heading out early. Throughout the conversation, anything Bill or I said, they looked at each other before responding. Finally, before they left, one of them said, "Y'all stay safe. You never know who you could run into out here," followed by a laugh as they walked away. We packed up early and left. While this isn't super creepy, these guys were the epitome of backwood redneck. The fact that we only woke up because of the dog still sketches me out to this day, and I wonder if I hadn't have awoken, or if the dog hadn't been with us, or if this situation had been any part different, if our fates would have been different too. I'm glad we didn't have to find out. I was going through a tough time and just wanted to be alone. We have a woods besides our house, so I decided to ride my dirt bike out there at night, sit by the fire, and just chill with some music. About an hour or so later, I wanted to change up the music, so I grabbed my iPod and started to surf through some songs until I found something that I liked. Now, I forgot to mention it, but at night the woods are pitch black out there, even with a fire, so you can only see a few feet around you. Basically, you and the fire are the only ones around in a sea of darkness. I switched songs and turned back to the fire. I froze. On the other side of the fire, a large form with pointed ears loomed in the darkness. The only reason I noticed it was because of the glowing eyes reflecting the flames that burned between us. This thing was huge. I'm about 6 feet tall, and it was taller than I was. I stood there paralyzed in fear as for what seemed like minutes stretched between us, only the music breaking the dead silence. Now I live in Ohio, so there aren't a whole lot of tall animals with pointy ears in the woods. We have no bears of any kind or wild animals in the area that are bigger than a deer. The thing before me was definitely no deer, and at the moment I didn't think it was human either. During our silent standoff, my brain finally recovered from shock and screamed for me to move. I quickly dropped everything in my hands, including my phone and iPod. I jumped on my dirt bike and tried to start it. And just like in the horror movies, it wouldn't start. Dread filled me, and I could feel my face pale. The engine turned over really slow, as if the battery was dead. I thought my heart would break my ribs. It was pounding so hard. Luckily, it has a Kickstarter as a backup, though I've never had any luck kickstarting it. I guess luck was smiling down on me that night, because with a hard kick, it started, and I flew through the woods as fast as I could. Looking back on it now, I'm guessing whatever it was could have attacked me at the same time. I don't know if it had already left during my panicked escape, or if it was still watching me with those fiery eyes as I fled. Once I got up to the house, I told my parents about what happened, and asked my dad to go back with me to grab my phone and iPod. However, it was really late, so he declined, and I guess he didn't believe me. Now, don't ask me why I would go back after escaping with my life, but I really wanted my stuff. I ended up calling my friend who lives nearby, and he agreed to come to my assistance. My friend and I went back out into the woods with, and I kid you not, swords and a disposable camera to get my stuff. I took the camera with us just in case I would be fortunate enough to snap a picture of whatever was out there with me. As I was snapping pics in one hand, then holding a sword in the other, we approached the site and gathered my things. The thing was nowhere in sight. As we were walking back up to my house, we noticed the neighboring house was lit up. However, it wasn't house lights, it was on fire. We dialed 911 and ended up finding out it was an abandoned house that caught fire. Now, I'm not sure if it had anything to do with what I saw, but it sure was weird to have happened all in one night around the same time. Until this day, I have no idea what animal would be taller than me and would approach a fire and music. Not sure if it was some kind of weird creature or possibly a person in a mask. I still have the disposable camera sitting on my desk. I haven't gotten around to getting them developed, but I think that maybe I should. A lot of time has passed, and I still occasionally do go out into the woods, but I can't help but wonder if the thing is still out there, watching me. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's walk in the woods. I'd like to give a huge thank you as always to my incredible patrons for helping me keep running the channel. If you would like to sign up to Patreon, you can get some awesome rewards by clicking the link in the description. It means the world to me, and for as little as $1, you can help keep things running smoothly over here at Mortis Media. Thanks guys. If you like the video, you know what to do. Like, comment, bell, subscribe, all the good stuff. Not only that, if there's a story that you would like to share about something potentially horrifying that has happened to you, feel free to send it to my email or post it to my Reddit page. Either are fine, and they should be featured if you include plenty of paragraphing, punctuation, and good description, the 3 key components to any good story. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.